Hey guys, it's Chris and I'm back. Yeah, it's been like 6 or 7 days, but I wanted to do this little quick bonus video. Yeah, we'll call it a bonus video. I like the sound of that. But anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about the last hero. Was he Valyrian?
Dracarys.
I want to talk about the last hero and who he was, or who he potentially was. We have no idea. The tales are very, very vague that old Nan gives us about the last hero, and being that you have the same kind of myth or hero figure from a lot of different cultures, you're definitely going to get discrepancies in the story. So first let's talk about Lightbringer. Okay, Lightbringer of course is the story about the last hero had to forge a sword, and of course we all know the story on how that happened. Apparently it took 3 different times for him to try to temper this sword. He tried for 30 days and failed when he tempered it in water and it broke. The second time he tried for 50 days and then it broke when he tried to temper it through a lion's heart. And the third time he hammered on this damn thing for 100 days, and he called his wife Nisa to bare her chest, and he plunged the sword and tempered it through her heart, and it became Lightbringer, the magical flaming sword. Now I've said in many videos, I do not think Lightbringer is a literal magical sword. I think that story is probably a story on how Valyrian steel is created in the first place. We know a lot of our magic in our story, which I've talked about in several other videos as well, requires blood and blood sacrifice. I think in our world that's basically how most magic works, or at least one aspect of magic, whether you're talking about this kind of northern ice magic as I call it, where you're talking about warging and skin changing, green sight, etc., or this kind of Valyrian fire style magic, dragon bonding, affinity for dragons, dragon dreams, potentially the ability to hatch and ride dragons, etc. So I think that there is a commonality there with Jon for sure. Now of course the Azor Ahai prophecy comes from Ahai, and that is a completely different location, really far off in Essos, you know, something that we don't even really talk about in our main story in Westeros, except for the fact that Melisandre comes from there, and we also know Quaithe is a Shadowbinder. She's not necessarily affiliated with the Red God. So this can all get rather confusing. Anyway, we also have the story with old Nan tells us about the last hero, where he went off on his little quest to save the world with some companions, 12 companions to be specific, as well as a dog, and everybody eventually died. He was looking for the children of the forest, and apparently he found the children of the forest to get help with their magical abilities to end up defeating the White Walkers and pushing them back to the land of always winter. On the other hand, it's also mentioned that when it got so cold, he tried to use his sword and it broke. I don't know about you, but it doesn't make much sense. On the one hand, you got this Azor Ahai figure, this last hero figure, that's tempering this magical flaming sword called Lightbringer, and it's supposed to be so special it catches fire and does these magical things. And on the other hand, you have a last hero who apparently went up to fight the White Walkers and defeat them, and apparently his sword just fucking broke when it got too cold. So either you have a story here that's got changed over time and centuries. I personally think it's more like a combination of people. For example, we have Jon, who fits the Azor Ahai description. He fits it in a very figurative way, you know, born under a bleeding star, etc. But you also have Dany, who fits it literally. She was literally born of salt and smoke on Dragonstone. She woke dragons from stone, literally, with her petrified dragon eggs. So they both definitely fit these prophecies as far as Azor Ahai, or the last hero, or the prince that was promised, whatever you want to call it. But I also think you have other players as well, specifically Sam being in the Citadel looking for what to do about the White Walkers in the wars to come, as well as Bran with his green sight being the new three-eyed crow or the new three-eyed raven, depending on if you watch the show or the books or both. So anyway, the point being is, why are we learning about how he tempered this sword? Well, basically you have this last hero figure, this Azor Ahai character, who supposedly had this magical sword that defeated White Walkers, and there is actually a mention of him actually defeating White Walkers when Sam and Jon are having a conversation about the last hero, something he found in the Night's Watch library, about how he defeated the White Walkers with a sword made of dragon steel. And Jon thinks to himself, dragon steel, I wonder if that's the same thing as Valyrian steel. So I think that makes the connection that dragon steel and Valyrian steel are the same thing, and that the Lightbringer story about Nisa and the sacrifice he made to make this Lightbringer sword is in fact the secret to Valyrian steel. So what's that got to do with Jon, as far as the Azor Ahai prophecy and him being the prince that was promised, if he is in fact the prince that was promised, and not Dany or Bran or anybody else that could fit that description, because you could damn near make anybody fit that description? Well, I think it ties into Jon's Targaryen or Valyrian side, because obviously we just got confirmation of R+L=J. He is half Targaryen, so therefore that has to mean something. It can't just be that he's Targaryen, he was Rhaegar's secret son, and oh well, you know, they had an affair or they got married in secret or whatever, end of story. It's got to be a magical thing. So I think that since he is the Song of Ice and Fire, being of Stark and Targaryen blood, we have two two different sides. The Stark side with magical properties from the Children of the Forest as far as warging, green sight, skin changing abilities. Then we have the Targaryen or Valyrian side of things with the fire style magic, the dragon bonding, the dragon riding, egg hatching, etc. So what the hell am I getting at ultimately here? I think that the last hero was probably either Valyrian himself or at least knew how to make Valyrian steel. Now the problem with that is, as far as our history goes, is that the long night when he existed and supposedly drove back the White Walkers to the lands of always winter happened about 8,000 years ago according to the Maesters. But the Valyrian stronghold over in Essos, where the Targaryens descended from, apparently didn't come to fruition except about 5,000 years ago. So that would make it about 3,000 years too late for anybody of Valyrian descent to come over to Westeros with the first men. So what does that mean? Well, it means that perhaps somebody of Valyrian descent, being the last hero, could have already been in Westeros before the first men. Since the first men's been around about 10,000 years or so, and Valyrians came to the height of their power about 5,000 years before our story started, those timelines just don't line up. And then of course about 400 years before our story started, we had the Doom of Valyria that essentially destroyed old Valyria, and then of course the Targaryens were established on Dragonstone, and Aegon then conquered the Seven Kingdoms with his sister wives 300 years before our story started. So all these timelines just don't match up. So a couple things could be going on here. Either A, the Maesters just have it wrong as far as the timelines, because we know that timelines in real history can be certainly skewed. They can certainly be a couple thousand years off as far as when the first men came over, when Valyria was established, when it ended, all that good stuff, etc. Or you had the possibility of others being in Westeros before the first men. Is there any evidence of that? Actually, there is. And I don't want to drag this out and make it a huge long video, but I do want to throw out one piece of evidence at least. You have the Iron Islands and the Sea Stone Chair. Now, if you're a show only watcher, you don't really see the Sea Stone Chair, but the Sea Stone Chair is basically the throne, essentially, of the Iron Islands on Pike. It was discovered by the first men, already made, and apparently it's made from an oily black stone, very similar description to a Ahai in some of the cities over in Essos, and was found in its current shape, shaped like a kraken. And of course, eventually the Ironborn came along to rule the Iron Islands at a later date, and took this as their house sigil when they formed their house, and used the Sea Stone Chair as their throne when they ruled the Iron Islands as a separate kingdom. So if this throne was already made and already sculpted and created and was found by the first men in Westeros, that points to the possibility of somebody being in Westeros before the first men. So that points to our history not being exactly correct. Now, of course, we know some things are going to be off in history just like real history. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be things that people pass down that are incorrect. There's going to be people omit stuff from written records that they don't personally believe in. This story is all about the human heart in conflict with itself, and of course George R. R. Martin has told us that many, many times. So anyway, my little theory, if it's even my theory, I'm sure people have thought of this before in plenty of other places online or videos, etc. I hadn't really even done research on it. I was just thinking the other day that I think basically the last hero was probably of some type of Valyrian descent, or at least knows something about making Valyrian steel. Because I think that without that connection to the last hero, as far as history repeating itself, and the possibility of the last hero or Azor Ahai being from old Valyria, or at least a Valyrian descent, or at least knowing something about the Valyrians and their methods of creating Valyrian steel, then I don't think it matters that Jon's a Targaryen. I don't think the whole Rhaegar thing would be that important. Now, of course, the Azor Ahai prophecy comes from Ahai anyway in Essos, so that makes you question everything about the Long Night and how did it affect the entire world of Planetos, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, guys, I'll leave it there. Just leave it short and sweet. Give me your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Was the last hero Valyrian, of Valyrian descent, or at least knew something about making Valyrian steel? Because in my opinion, the story about Nissa Nissa and Lightbringer is essentially a story on how to make Valyrian steel, since all of our magic in some way, shape, or form typically requires blood sacrifice, which is hinted throughout the books. So let me know what you think about that in the comments below as well. Thanks for all the support, you guys. I really, really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.